Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So let's talk a little bit more about gladiators and particularly kind of Roman era combat using the sword and shield, or scutum and gladius in this case, but specifically applying it to gladiators. Now, recently I did a video linked below. If you haven't seen that already, go and have a look at that before you watch this video, I guess. And various points came out of that video, which I think are certainly interesting and worth exploring a little bit more. Now, one of the things I alluded to, well, I mentioned in that video, in fact, was the fact that various types of gladiator that were quite popular. And the first thing we have to say is there were many types of gladiator. Some of them we don't actually know very much about, and some of them were very clearly a rare thing. But amongst the main gladiators, the commonly encountered gladiators that are represented in art and mentioned a lot in recorded text, we know quite a bit about them, and it is quite interesting to note that there are several different types of gladiators which, in a broad sense, share some similarities. So put the retiarius aside, because they don't fit within this, but several of the gladiators, the Thracian, the Murmillo, the Secutor and the Provocator, they were all commonly encountered types of gladiators. The Secutor normally fights against the retiarius, and the Thracian and the Murmillo normally fight against each other, and the Provocator normally fights against another Provocator. Additionally, there is a Hoplomachus as well, and the Hoplomachus sometimes fights against other types of gladiator, but there is a common factor between all of these types, and that is they share certain equipment. So the Hoplomachus, admittedly their primary weapon is a spear, but they do have a sword or at least a large dagger as a backup. So all of these, so we're talking about Provocator, Secutor, Murmillo and Thracian or Thrax, and with the exception of the spear, the Hoplomachus, all of them have a shield of slight, differing types. We'll talk about that in a second. They all have a shield. They all have a sword, a short sword, probably a bit smaller than this actually. This is a particularly kind of big gladius. We're probably talking about something which is a small gladius, almost a large pugio or dagger, from the art that we have, the art evidence we have. And they all have, and this is the important bit, massive helmets. Now, I don't have a massive helmet, or I don't have a massive gladiatorial helmet anyway, but for representational purposes, I have pulled out my fencing mask, okay, just to give you a general idea. There are certain types of gladiators that have a large helmet, and these vary slightly in design. So if we look at the Secutor, it's a very characteristic helmet with round eye holes usually, and quite close fitting, quite kind of rounded, with no kind of bits to catch for the retiarius to catch their net on. The Provocator helmet is sort of modelled on the Roman soldiers' culus helmet, but it shares, in some degrees, functionally, it shares some characteristics with the Secutor helmet. And then we've got the Thrax or Thracian and the Murmillo, and they have helmets which have very broad brims and projecting bits, and a big crest on the top, and they're very characteristic, and they look different to each other, but they're broadly similar. And then we have the Hoplomachus helmet, which again is quite similar to maybe the Thrax helmet. Now, all of these helmets share certain features. First of all, they protect the head in the broadest sense. So they protect obviously the top of the head, the side of the head, the back of the head, and the front, the face. But in addition to that, they all have projections to some degree, projections that protect not only the throat area, which is obviously very important, very vulnerable, but also the way that they flare out projects the top here. Now, let's talk about, and also mentioning that they protect the face, they therefore protect the eyes. Now, when we're fighting with a sword and shield, if we just put the head protection aside for a second, generally speaking, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Viking era or whether you're talking about Zulus or whether you're talking about Roman soldiers, the two vulnerable areas when you've got a large shield in play are essentially over the top to the face, okay, because the body is so well covered. The top and the line to the face, or if there's no helmet at all, obviously the top of the head, sides of the head and the neck, okay, so round here, and then, perhaps surprisingly to some people, the lead leg. Okay, there is also another vulnerable target when swords or cutting weapons are involved, not so much when thrusting weapons are involved, although slightly, but not as much, and that is the weapon arm. When you have a large shield, unlike a smaller buckler, I'll just grab a buckler here, where a buckler might project out with the sword as you cut, the buckler protects the line to the hand and the sword arm. A large shield doesn't necessarily do that so well, because the large shield might stay closer to your body. If the large shield is staying closer to your body, that means that when you give an attack, be it a thrust or a cut, the hand and the arm does become more exposed because it projects beyond the shield. Of course there are ways, and we do see this in Roman art in fact, where the shield can be lifted up and can actually be used like this to actually protect the arm similarly. But you don't necessarily do that all the time, and that comes at a cost, especially if you're fighting against spears and especially if you're fighting against multiple opponents. By keeping the shield here and dishing out your attacks wherever you can all around if you're fighting multiple people, this is protecting your body against missiles and incoming weapons that you don't see. So if something's thrown at you like a javelin, or if a spearman over there suddenly jabs at you, this is still in front of your body. If someone's there and they're swinging a sword at you, and you lift the shield up to encounter or intercept the incoming sword arm at the same time as stabbing them in the face, we're now completely uncovered to the person throwing or stabbing with a spear or a sword from over there. So, quite simply, when a larger shield is closer to your body, there are basically three primary vulnerable areas: the face, the arm, the leg. Now, that being the case, so we've got face, arm, leg. If we go to any of these gladiators that we're talking about, so the provocator, the secutor, the murmillo, the thrax, and to a degree the hoplomachus as well, they all have, number one, what are these three areas? They all have massive helmets, not just small face protections like a fencing mask. They'll have massive helmets that protect from cuts, thrusts, attacks at the throat, all this kind of thing. Even these attacks that come down at the top here, which when you've got this type of shield, if a sword is coming over the top there, that is a vulnerable bit as well. They all have their head very, very well protected. They all have their legs, or lead leg, depends on the size of the shield, protected. And I have noted in my previous video that there is a tendency, I don't know if this was a rule, we probably don't have enough data to even say, but there is a tendency for the gladiators using the larger scutum to only have protection on the lead leg, while the smaller shields used by, for example, the thrax and the hoplomachus mean that they have leg protection on both legs and kind of bigger leg protection. This might be to compensate for their smaller shields. It might be because they were using a different system of footwork. Because they've got a smaller shield, they sometimes pass with the right side and right leg forward, so they need right leg protection as well as left leg protection. When you've got a very large shield, you tend to keep the left foot forward, so you probably only need left leg protection. And as someone who wears leg protection in HEMA sparring often, I do sabre a lot of the time, and I only wear leg protection on my right leg in club sparring. In competition, I'll probably put it on both legs. But if you can get away with not wearing leg protection on one leg, then it's preferable to do so, because it makes you a little bit lighter and quicker, and it's just more comfortable. Leg protection does tend to be a bit annoying when you're kind of from a cumbersome point of view. And finally, the sword arm. Okay, so we talked about the sword arm. So all of these types of gladiators seem to have worn what's called a manica, which is essentially a long sleeve. And in many, or perhaps even all cases, it seems to have had a mitten element that wrapped around the hand. So often, when I'm talking about medieval and ancient world swords, I point out the fact that they don't have fantastic hand protection. Yes, they've got cross guards, or no guard in some case, or almost no guard. But fundamentally, hands are very, very vulnerable. If a person chooses to target your hand, you have to be aware of that with these types of swords, unlike later period swords with more developed hilts. But it's interesting that these gladiators, the provocator, secutor, murmillo, thrax, had full arm protection from shoulder all the way down to the hand, and in many cases the hand as well. So now let's have a little look at what's vulnerable. So imagine you're facing against a thrax or a murmillo or a secutor or provocator. They have a massive shield to various sizes. Okay, fair enough, the Thrax shield is not as big as this. The Hoplomachus shield is smaller and rounder. But certainly with the Provocator, Secator and Murmillo, they've got a large shield in front of them. They've got head protection, massive head protection that completely covers everything here, from the front, the sides, the back, the top, and the neck, and the top of the shoulders, collarbones to an extent. Then their weapon arm, they can attack fearlessly, basically, because their weapon arm is completely protected with this manica, which incidentally is padded, but it may have also had leather or perhaps metal elements added onto it as well to make it even better protection. And incidentally, the Roman army, many of you will know, adopted this temporarily for use against the Dacians with their falxes, and I'll be talking about falxes in the future. And finally, the leg, at least the lead leg and possibly even the rear leg as well, has protection. So these guys, despite the fact that in many ways gladiators are often represented as practically naked with their loincloths, actually when you break it down, with the large shield, with the massive helmet, with the manica, with the leg protection, they were designed, they were set up, yes they were very vulnerable here, but that's covered by the shield. So long as they protect with their shield and they use their shield in the way that they should do, they are exceedingly difficult to get around. Now, I've mentioned many times in the past that I went through a process of trying to devise a training system for sword and scutum for a BBC production that in the end never got made, but we were training people for 3 months, and actually it was a great learning curve for me. I'd not really trained with these before, so I came at it with almost no experience. And I just used my HEMA kind of background experience, using other types of shield, bucklers and everything else, and talking to people out there, like Olaf Coopers, for example, who work with gladiatorial and Roman army equipment, and getting their feedback and their impressions, their ideas as well, a lot of which supported and informed the conclusions I came to. And my conclusion is, even without head protection, and bearing in mind when I had these guys training with fencing masks and wooden weapons and scutums, and even without all of the full gladiatorial equipment, it was amazing how difficult it was to get around these scutum. Yes, they are heavy, they are tiresome, but they protect you, especially with this curve and this length and this size. They protect you so well. And really, pretty much the two most vulnerable points, occasionally we used to get the lead leg, but the two most vulnerable points where we managed to land hits with any sort of reliable, with any regularity, and even then not really, was somewhere in the face here, okay, coming down with thrusts mostly, and over the top here into the top of the lead shoulder, and very occasionally to this side if the person was leading with their right side, but basically either side of the head and into the middle and into the face, and very occasionally over the top into the chest. And it is very interesting to me that if we look at Roman helmets, they're specifically set up to basically block this. They block the line to the face, particularly the ones with the flaring brims or the flaring bottoms, protect these lines to the side here as well. And of course you've got the manica as well, adding to the arm protection, which is phenomenal. So it really closes down all of the available targets. Now the question is why? And I suppose this is the concluding point, is that there is, as I mentioned in my previous video, again linked below, there is this pervasive myth that gladiators were sort of cannon fodder, that they were, they were trained up for a minimal amount of time and then just kind of piled into the arenas and slaughtered each other. And it's just not the case. The fact is that gladiators were, they weren't like some people who said, oh, it was like WWE of its time. No, it wasn't quite, because they were killing each other sometimes. It was very dangerous. And sometimes they did decide for a special occasion, yep, you're going to kill each other for this. But by and large, these were expensive commodities. We've got to face it. In a world of slavery, where a huge percentage of the world's population were treated as commodities, okay? They were either workers or they were fighters, but they were treated like commodities by the state. And these people were owned by the gladiator schools, and they were trained by the gladiator schools. They were very expensive, and they didn't want them to die quickly. They wanted a good fight, a relatively long fight, an entertaining fight, a challenging fight, fight. And so really the gladiatorial equipment, from my point of view, is really set up to help prolong the fight and increase the chances of survival for the fighters, for the participants. The final thing I would say as well is this bleeds over into Roman military equipment, and obviously it's a two-way exchange. And the shield that the provocator, as I've said in my previous video, I believe the provocator is essentially representative of the Roman soldier. And if we look at the equipment of the Murmillo and the Thrax and the Secutor, they're all basically inspired by the equipment of the Roman soldier. They use basically something like the Roman army shield. They use helmets even. We've talked about the gladiatorial helmets. If we ignore the face protection on them, if you actually look at the Roman culus with the way the cheek guards are fitted, and the way that you have the brim at the back to prevent these thrusts coming over this side here, and even the little brim here to prevent things from sliding down the front of the helmet and coming straight into the face or down onto the top of the chest or throat. There are basically the same set of considerations for the Roman soldier as for the Roman gladiator, with the exception that, as I always point out in my videos, soldiers spend most of their time marching, digging, sleeping, eating, these sorts of things. Okay, they don't spend most of their time in hand-to-hand combat, and so therefore the Roman army soldier can't go around in gladiatorial equipment, with the exception of the manica in Dacia, or Romania now. They have to be more lightly equipped so that they can actually do all their other jobs and travel around and march for miles, 20 miles a day, or however far they used to go. So there we go, conclusion. Gladiators, very well protected, and really having this enormous head protection changes everything. If you want to do this in a training, whether you do LARP or SCA or HEMA or whatever else, I urge you to get a massive shield. If you've never tried this before, get a massive shield, okay? This is all you need. You need a sparring weapon that you're comfortable using with. It could be a boffer, could be just a stick, could be a LARP weapon, whatever. Get a large shield, ideally a scutum, because these scuta are really set up perfectly for this job. And then stick head protection on, like this, okay? You stick your head protection on and say that basically any hits to the helmet or to the head protection or to the throat are void, that they just don't connect, okay? Just regard that as, yes, you can hit it, but it won't do anything. And you will see how difficult it is to score really incapacitating hits on your opponent. And if you say, well, the arm is off target as well, or it hits on the arm won't do anything, wow, it becomes really difficult to get past that shield. Anyway, go give it a try, or at least have a think about it. If you are a writer of books, or you're doing role-playing games or this kind of stuff, have a think about this, because certain weapon and armor combinations are really difficult to get past, but they all have ramifications. And in this case, the ramifications are limitations. Obviously, it's heavy, it's tiring, it slows down your movement a little bit compared to how you might move with other weapons. The helmets are heavy, they limit your vision, they limit your hearing, they limit your breathing. So there are always ramifications with these things. You very rarely get lots of pluses without some minuses as well. Thanks for watching. Give us a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you really soon back again on Schola Gladiatoria channel. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.